how do you look at the middle class? What does the government want to do for the middle class?
Middle class is the big first beneficiary of this growth. Where are all these jobs being created? Who are the the first users of all of this infrastructure, whether it's the airports, the highways, is this middle class.
What do you think can the people of the country expect from this government with respect to its economic policy going forward? What new? What next?
It is an opportunity for us to insert ourselves more strongly into it, whether it's into global supply chains or in other things as well, setting standards or whatever it is.
नमस्कार दोस्तों, मेरे साथ प्रदीप भंडारी के साथ ये बजट स्पेशल इंटरव्यू देखने के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। पिछले साल इसी समय में अगर आपको याद होगा कि हमने सीरीज ऑफ इंटरव्यूज करे थे, पर इस बार एक इंटरिम बजट है और व्यूअर्स की डिमांड ये थी कि ऐसे शख्सियत से बात की जाए जो बजट का A to Z समझा सके, इंटरिम बजट का A to Z समझा सके। आज मेरे साथ में प्राइम मिनिस्टर्स इकोनॉमिक एडवाइजरी काउंसिल के मेंबर संजीव सान्याल जी जुड़ रहे हैं। संजीव सान्याल जी, जन की बात पे जुड़ने के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, शुक्रिया।
नमस्कार। नमस्कार
संजीव जी, let me begin the entire interview with your tweet which has gone viral on the platform X, and it says that no gimmicks, no populism, conservative macroeconomic management, fiscal deficit declined to 5.8% from 5.8% to 5.1% of GDP, post-COVID consolidation, continued emphasis of infra with directly targeting absolute party with housing, health, etc. I want to ask you, has the budget become a quote-unquote non-event? How do you look at this budget? Because the excitement factor is missing, and your views are also echoed by Anand Mahindra, who said we should not lay overemphasis on budget as a matter of policy. It is all big announcements happen over the period of time across the year, as it happens in any private company.
So I agree with Mr. Mahindra, but let me say in this specific case, it's even more true. This is an interim budget. It's a vote on account. The real budget will happen in July. So in that sense, it is correct that the Honorable Finance Minister basically kept taxes and other things unchanged. And what she basically tried to signal is that we are a serious government which takes macroeconomic stability seriously. So what they said, look, continuity, no freebies and other populist measures ahead of an election. And meanwhile, we will continue to spend on infrastructure. We will continue to spend on certain poverty-related alleviation schemes. And meanwhile, we'll continue with our fiscal consolidation, with the deficit coming down from 5.8 to 5.1 and eventually going down to 4.5 and thereon. So I think it was basically a signal of continuity of a government that is firmly in control, and also signaling that this is we are conservative about macroeconomic stability.
So a political analyst is saying that it also speaks a lot of confidence that the government is coming back. I'll not ask you the politics of it, but I want to focus on the GDP, which has been, emphasized a lot, which is governance, development and performance. And in this one figure which has been trending is the massive spend on infrastructure, which is 3.4% of GDP. Now, compared to the earlier government, the average spend was roughly around 3.5 lakh crores. And this government, the average spend has been more than 10 lakh crores. Now, to your critics who say that no job creation has taken place in this government, how do you respond to that? And B, do you believe that what is the method behind ensuring that at least an average of 10 lakh crore, which is a huge sum of money, has gone to capex, and right now out of 15 lakh, 11 crore only on infrastructure?
So this is something that's been an article of faith of this government. We believe that India deserves better infrastructure. This is something we complained about for decades. But we are the people actually building it. Whether look at the highways, you look at the airports being upgraded, and not just in the very big cities. You go to Agartala, you'll see a really good airport there. You go to many small towns, you'll see decent quality airports. The same thing is happening with the highway quality that is upgrading, or now the rollout that will happen not by the government but by the private sector of 5G. So infrastructure is something we take seriously, and we are building this out. In this context, let me say, since you brought up jobs, this is the result not of some Keynesian massaging. We are unapologetically supply-side oriented policymakers, and we believe that infrastructure is a good thing in its own right. Now, of course, it has a side effect in that it builds some demand, it creates jobs and so on. But we are not doing this as a substitute for private sector investment. Private sector investment has its own place, and contrary to what many people may be arguing, private sector investment is actually also picking up. You look at the corporate balance sheets of virtually any company that you know of, and they will show that they are in rude health. The banks have been cleaned up. They are also in rude health. To say that there is no corporate spending that is happening is totally not true. I mean, virtually any company I talk to has got fairly ambitious plans.
So are you saying that the criticism that this government has not created enough jobs is unfair, biased and motivated?
I would say so, yes. But I mean, obviously, like every country in the world, we went through a shock during COVID. Yes. I'm not denying the shock of COVID, for which this government was not responsible. Once having come out of that COVID shock, which was a shock, we then went through a recovery, and we are still in that phase of recovery. In fact, we are the fastest recovering economy in the world. There are still large swaths of the world economy, which particularly like Europe, for example, which is not growing at all. I mean, Germany is in recession. So in that context, we are doing more than well, i.e. recovering, and we are creating jobs. And by the way, there is no such thing as jobless growth. If you compound growth over a period of time, you will generate jobs. There is no other way.
Jobless growth is an oxymoron, you will say?
Absolutely, it's an oxymoron. Now, it may be true for a particular quarter or a few quarters, but if there is no example in world history of sustained growth in any country in the world where you haven't ended up creating jobs. In fact, there is no other known way of creating jobs.
Mr. Sanyal, one very interesting fact is, and I was going through this data point which suggested that India is very uniquely positioned because China's rate of growth has declined and it is declining consistently. And every analyst and economist is saying that China will not continue to grow the way it used to in the past. And as you rightly said, that India has been growing at a consistent rate. It's the fastest growing economy and it's not an aberration, it's become a trend. So in this scenario, I want to ask you that if I look at the next 5 years, and I have analyzed this government's budget, which speaks a lot about a long-term vision. It is not ad hoc policy making based on elections and politics. That is something which is a hard fact. What is that long-term vision to the Viksit Bharat, where it is going on? What is the continuum in the budgets in the last 9 years? Because you've very, very closely been working. What is that continuum which you see in all the budgets till now, including the interim budget?
So first of all, let's take the longer term view. We are right now already the world's 5th largest economy in US dollar terms, but in purchasing power terms, we are already the 3rd largest. And we are the fastest growing. So in about 18 months' time, we will go past Germany by most indications and become the 4th largest economy. Another 18 months from there, we will become the 3rd largest economy by going past Japan. Of course, it helps that neither of those two economies are growing. So, it's a target we can catch up with more easily. But nevertheless, by 27, 28 or somewhere that time, we will become the world's 3rd largest economy. Now, China, of course, saw this high growth phase over the last 25 years. And people should remember that it got there essentially through the process of compounding. People know about compound interest rates. People forget how powerful it is. In the beginning, 7% GDP growth rate may not, it just gets you 7% further out the lane. But you compound it year after year. That's what China also did. It compounded year after year. Now, as it happens to be, we now have an economy that under very difficult external circumstances is still doing 7%. Remember, we are getting no help from exports right now. As things stand, merchandise exports are maybe flat to a little bit down. Services exports are a little bit up, but there is no great help we are getting from external sector. So we are generating this 7% growth almost entirely internally. Now imagine an environment, and the world economy goes through cycles where the world is cutting interest rates, growth is accelerating. We'll easily do 9% GDP growth rate under those circumstances.
You are anticipating 9 in the next 5 years, short term or long term?
Well, I can't predict when that will happen. But I'm just pointing out this machinery we have created, this infrastructure we have put in place. This is capable of doing those kinds of growth rates without blowing up. The problem in the past was we would do these kinds of growth rates for a few years, But then our infrastructure, our corporates, our banks, they couldn't take it for too long. The economic machine would overheat. I'm just saying that, look, we have cleaned up a financial system which can take this growth. We have got infrastructure that can take this growth. We have got company balance sheets that can take this growth. And even without the external sector, we are doing 7%. So this is a totally different machine we have created.
Your critics say that your optimism on growth is justified, but when you look at growth from the point of view of per capita income, India does not fare as the other developed economies do. Is that a fair criticism according to you?
Well, I think it's a fair point. I wouldn't call it a fair criticism because we are not responsible for it. I mean, the fact of the matter is we inherited very low per capita income. And it is true that even when we become the world's third largest economy, we will be the world's largest population. So once you divide one by the other, our per capita income will be still quite low. And there will be still large portions of the population that will be poor and require support. I'm not denying that. But there are some advantages to sheer size. First of all, per capita income will be higher than what it would have otherwise been. Two, the government is getting a bigger pot of tax collections, which can spend on infrastructure, but also providing direct support to the poor. Our place in the world goes up, which means that we can negotiate with the rest of the world in a different way, whether it's in trade or geopolitics or whatever it may be. So there are some advantages to simply having higher economic mass, and we are generating that mass. Now, I'm not making the case that we will not be poor even at the end of this decade when our economy will be much bigger, because the fact of the matter is that we have to divide it by this large population. But even there, let me say that our population has almost stopped growing. So in that sense, we are now not even producing enough kids to replace ourselves. And so the only reason population is now growing is basically because we are living longer. That is a good reason. And over time, in the next 10, 15 years, population growth will basically become flat. And so all the economic growth we are getting goes directly into the per capita income.
So I've observed this government's economic policy, and I've not observed it as an expert, but I've observed it as logically that there is a huge focus on ensuring that the government stands with those at the bottom of the pyramid by ensuring there are direct benefits without any leakages, and at the same time creating that environment where economic activity can happen with least government interference. Now, one constant criticism, and this something is what I've observed in every budget, has been that this government, like it has focused in a targeted manner for the poor, now the Lakpati Didi, the middle class has not been focused on. Now, my question to you is, please enlighten me or the viewers with your approach with respect to the middle class. And as you take this economy forward, how do you look at the middle class? What does the government want to do for the middle class? Or is the government of the opinion that we create the favorable climate and that is enough for the middle class?
Well, let me say that the middle class is the first beneficiary of this growth. Where are all these jobs being created? Who are the the first users of all of this infrastructure, whether it's the airports, the highways, is this middle class. Now, of course, the annoyance comes at every budget is because middle class always wants some tax sop. Now, I'm afraid, there are limits to that. And in the end, all this infrastructure requires, I personally also, I'm paying those same taxes. So it's not like I'm not paying those taxes. It would be wonderful if we could have much lower tax rates for this country. And I'm in favor of simplifying the direct tax, personal tax rates as well. But the fact is that we need a lot more compliance. Even now, basically, 2 crore people basically pay the taxes for this country. Now, we need to widen that. Now, if you widen that, then the burden can be lowered on everybody. So this requires a certain compliance culture. Now, we are improving it. More people are indeed filing taxes and so on. And this is dramatic improvement for how it used to be. But, we would love for it to be more equitably spread. Then, of course, we would be able to lower the burden on everybody. But as things stand, I have to square the circle in some fashion. I can't have a larger deficit because I am conservative on that front. I need to build on this infrastructure. I have to, therefore, continue to tax. But even there, we have tried to lower the pain points as far as possible. So the standard deduction has slowly grown over time, and we have anonymized the income tax assessment. So at every stage, we have tried to sort of smoothen things up as much as possible. Just today, the Honorable Finance Minister announced that there are all these legacy, 1 crore legacy cases, some of them like 25,000, even less of cases. Those are now being withdrawn and dissolved. So, at every stage we try to make things be. But, there has to be a culture of paying taxes in this country. And if everybody pays taxes, it just the burden will just become radically lower on everybody else.
Mr. Sanyal, honestly, I've seen that a lot less opposition has happened to this budget, political opposition also, and opposition by those who have an alternate economic viewpoint than what I saw in the last budget. Now, it's an interim budget, understandable. My question to you is very, very pointed, that you did not answer and you did not predict that you're looking at a 9% when, but tell me one thing, it is understandable from the political climate in which we are, and as a psephologist, I can tell you that there are more chances for this government to repeat. If hypothetically imagine that as a scenario, what do you think can the people of the country expect from this government with respect to its economic policy going forward? What new? What next?
So if you're talking about, say, an Amrit Kal of till 2047, if that's what you're really aiming at.
Absolutely.
So there are a whole bunch of things we need to do. Remember, this 25 years is not just happens to be the 75th to the 100th year of our independence. That's coincidental. But it also will coincide with our demographic peak period. Yes. So that is also there. As it happens to be, this is also a period where the geopolitics of the world, although it may look a little dire right now, but the fact is it's becoming more fluid. And it is an opportunity for us to insert ourselves more strongly into it, whether it's into global supply chains or in other things as well, setting standards or whatever it is. So all of this is in play in this 25 years, and that's why we should take advantage of it. So what should we do about it? But first thing, I'd go back to the old point, we have to sustain growth. This is about compounding the growth. In order to do that, at no point in time should we try to unnecessarily speed it up too much at any point in time. Why am I making this point? Because there is always if you have a good machine that you happen to have built, you happen to have a Lamborghini, it's very, very tempting to press the accelerator. But in fact, you have to drive according to what the road is. And this is important given the experience of other parts of the world. For example, Southeast Asia. Just like we are growing rapidly today, in the mid-90s, Southeast Asia was growing, Thailand was the next great Japan or whatever. But then they had the Asian crisis because they tried to grow too fast and their financial system eventually blew up, and they've never generated those kinds of growth rates ever again. So important that macro stability is something that we always give credence to. 2, we continue with this business of building infrastructure, right? I think the emphasis may have to change a little bit. Right now, what we are doing is building intercity connections. The next round of investment has to be intracity. Our cities inside them have to improve the quality of life, and you're seeing that for the first time. We are seriously doing that, say in Mumbai, building a completely new metro system, connecting through the airport, coastal road, harbour link, all kinds of things that we are doing. So that now needs to be done systematically across the country in other cities, medium-sized cities, smaller cities, villages, and so on. So the intra-city, intra-village infrastructure has to be upgraded. That's key to upgrading the quality of life. So that is another very important thing we need to do. Third, we need to do something about the administrative system. So our bureaucracy is something, of course, everybody knows we inherited it from the British. Now, what was it designed for? It was essentially designed for control.
Yes.
And then in the socialist period, we invested further in control because that's, license, permit, Raj, everybody has to get the gazetted officer to sign even if you want a passport. What we were doing, even strengthening that control. Now, since 91, what we have done is reduce the powers of that bureaucracy. But we have not reformed that bureaucracy. That bureaucracy is still essentially designed to control. We just that now, because we are a liberalized economy, it can do less damage, but it is still designed for doing. So we now need to redesign and reform the bureaucracy for purposes of service delivery.
So are you talking about the way this government has reformed, re-looked at the entire criminal procedure code in terms of getting the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita? Are you looking at, are you
No, so there is a whole,
indicating as a completely new approach to look at
so
the
we need to do it
system?
at every step.
Yes.
So this is just one part of it, whether it's the criminal procedure and so on. But no, I'll give you another example. Today, where does services get delivered to the common citizen? Okay, who is an important person? Municipal commissioner, the district magistrate. This is where the rubber hits the road, right? Now, in the bureaucracy, this is usually the most junior-most people. It's a 33-year-old who is expected to deliver this. He or she is not even there for a long, and average district magistrate is there for 18 months, 2 years, something like that. How do you expect this person to deliver this good? The whole thing is not designed for delivery of the service. That person is supposed to chair some 50, 60 committees in that district. It's impossible in this 18-month period to even have met once who the members of this committee are. So the point I'm making to you is, this is therefore a lopsided system. Once this person becomes more senior, what do? They have ended up in the secretariat. It should be the other way around. More senior people should actually be in the field, because this junior district magistrate, nobody in the secretariat listens to them. They're the most junior, they may be kings of their district, but in the secretariat, they're nobody. It should be flipped. We need to send more senior people into these roles with experience, and ask them to have fixed tenures, or at least longer tenures. At least 3 years you need to be there. So this is just one example. We need to rethink our entire administrative system. Same thing needs to be done with our judicial system. It's ridiculous to have 47 million cases, or whatever the number happens to be today, stuck in our judicial system. Enforcement of contracts is key to having an advanced economy.
Is this what you're indicating as the next big bang reform of this government? Or
well, I have argued that these things need to be done. Now, who the next government will be and all that, I'll leave it to you. But these are things that need to be done.
My last question to you, Mr. Sanyal, how out of 10, how much will you rate this budget?
I don't into rating it. Those in the government cannot rate their own budget. That I leave for citizens of the country.
But are you happy, satisfied, or overwhelmed, or you think more could have been done with this budget? Or are you happy?
No, I think this is the correct thing. It's an interim budget. It's a vote on account. Large changes should not be made. This is precisely what I would have wanted it to be. At the same time, they have, while refraining from doing anything populist, they have signaled certain types of continuity, whether it's infrastructure and other things. That signals a continuity of purpose, which is again correct thing to do.
Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, thank you so much for joining me. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the member of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, who's laid out the entire points and has answered all the questions which could have been answered. Thank you so much, Mr. Sanyal. Pleasure.
Pleasure.